For today, we have a couple of your classmates who are out with injuries and infirmities, so we're gonna try and record this, which is gonna kind of tie me to this area so that the microphone can pick me up over the AC unit. Because of course we've got to run an AC unit when there's snow on the ground. Such is life. That thermostat hasn't responded to human reason or intuition in years. So we left our class the other day with talking about a Dawn redwood that was planted by Mr. Marbury, and it was a gift to the university community from not here. And our sort of parting guideline was to come back to class with just an outline. Don't write any paragraphs, don't write 2 pages of script or anything like that. And we'll talk about why not to do those things. But just an outline of how you might help folks connect with or have some beginning sense of understanding about not just the biographical, the biological facts of the Dawn redwood as a tree species, but some sense of importance about it. Some sense of relation or connection with it, and so forth. This is interpretation. Getting past those dry, boring facts that, quite frankly, nobody really particularly cares about, and why should they? 2, trying to understand how this phenomenon, this entity, this historic person, or this sequence of events, this historic story, and so forth, might potentially lend some insight to anybody who is present's own life, their sense of their understanding of the world. Okay? So, if you have that brief assignment on paper, go ahead and pull that out. We're going to start there today. And while you guys are pulling those out, or flipping to that page in your notes, or pulling up that screen on your digital device, I'm going to just remind folks we have meetings this afternoon in here, a little bit after 4 p.m. for summer camp. For those of you who are interested or curious about heading west with Rec Summer Camp this summer, we'll have the itinerary, packing list, stuff like that, all linked up and ready to go for you. And we'll also have a meeting at noon on Thursday, tomorrow, also in this space for an hour. And then at noon, 1 or 2 p.m. on Friday in this room, it's all the same meeting. So whichever of them among those, if you're interested, or even just curious, get to any one of those meetings. I will try to record them, but unfortunately for our absent classmates today and for anybody not able to make any of those meetings, listening to a recording of me talk is even less interesting than listening to me talk. So if you can, make it to the meeting. It's a lot more interactive and interesting, hopefully for you, in that way. Are there any other announcements or updates for the good of the cause? Any other meetings like Forestry Club or SAF or anything like that, Backpacking Club going on?
I think that there's a forestry meeting tonight at 6.
Yes.
187, maybe.
I want to say it's in 166. Yeah. Cool. So, get over to the Forestry Club meeting. Whether or not you are a part of Forestry Club yet, maybe you could be. So, everybody kind of remember where we left off on our previous class session? Good to go on Monday? It was a much nicer weather day on that day. Thank goodness for our tree tour. Still cool, brisk even, but not snowy and wet. Okay, so let's kind of, before we jump into the details of people's very, very first draft efforts of working on a bit of interpretive content generation, let's kind of couch what you are doing, what you have done, in its context inside of a full-scale, fully developed environmental interpretation sort of plan or outline or document. Okay, so we've got a couple of different sections. For any given guided hike, we'll use a guided hike or a scavenger hunt self-guided hike like the Tree Campus Tour, the historic tour that we were on Monday afternoon, every one of those has a document like this behind it. And it's a ton of work to really put one of these together, to the point that you could roll it out at a national park and take people from any country in the world, of any age and pretty much any mobility capability, on that guided hike, and for it to go pretty well each time. Not for it to go the same each time. That's a lot less interesting for you as the interpreter, giving the same rote speech, let's say, 150 times over the course of 4 or 5 months of peak season. Well, that would make you a dull boy, right? All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. So the point of this document, the point of this outline, and not a script, is to do the prep work, do the homework beforehand, to gather all of your different tools for interpretation, so that you can pick and choose and string together this outline, or parts of this outline, edit it on the fly on a hike by hike basis every single time, according to keeping it interesting for you. Because if you're having a good time, your participants are going to see that, and they are going to model their behavior and their sense of how things are going based directly on your sense of how things are going, communicated in verbal and nonverbal ways. So, let's talk through each of these sections real quick, and then we'll get into what you guys and gals have done for today. So, first we have a pregame and prep phase. In very short, we'll go back through all these in much more detail, but in very short, before you can take people on a hike, you've got to take the hike yourself and make sure there aren't any downed trees or like live power lines or rabid wombats or whatever. In the unlimited version of Magic the Gathering, rabid wombats were a sight to behold. I mean, that was some real 1992 card game dork stuff. So you got to make sure that you don't have too many rabid wombats on your hike, otherwise that could cause a real problem for someone who is mobility limited and is going to be the slowest person fleeing the rabid animal, if that makes sense. Okay? All of that is quite a bit of work. So there is rechecking your safety and first aid kit. Do you have fresh batteries in your light source, your backup light source, and your backup light source if your guided hike is a cave tour? Lots and lots and lots of prepping and checking, so that being an environmental interpreter in a professional sense is not really a job where you show up gulping your coffee down and you're 3 minutes late and people are gathered and kind of wondering what's going on, waiting for you to go. No, this is a pencil that you've already sharpened for up to a couple of hours that day before you get started. Okay? And that's built right into the workday schedule. That's fine. That's okay. This is also a chance for you to gather yourself. We'll talk about different personal styles of interaction and energy economy and conservation in people later in the semester. But the short version is that some of us are extroverts and we get really excited. We gain energy by interacting with people. Other folks are pretty strong introverts. And some folks are kind of mesoverts, sort of in between, ambiverts, I don't know. But introverts tend to spend a lot of energy to interact with people, especially with strangers, with varied publics coming in to enjoy this guided hike that you put together. So part of the pregame is doing whatever you need to do to be fully present, to be fully prepared. We'll talk more about that later on. If you're a strong introvert, not a big deal. If you're a strong extrovert, not a big deal. Okay? Once we've gotten through all the safety check stuff, and there is quite a bit, then we can actually get to the content of the thing. We kick off the actual experience of the interpretation with the commencement of the introduction, using something like a hook. If you think back to Monday's or last Wednesday's class session, when we watched the video with Shelton Johnson, we heard some pretty cool dual reed recorder music that Shelton was playing which didn't have any explanation attached to it. There was not a clear connection to why a Buffalo Soldier is playing essentially woodwind music, or what have you. It was primarily functioning as a hook, a clear signal to everybody that, hey, this spot, this gathering of people, we are gathered here for a purpose. It is gonna be different than just kind of being on autopilot mode, wandering around the visitor center, maybe looking for the cotton candy vendor down the street or whatever. Hey, this is a curated thing. So that hook is some kind of an abnormal stimulus, which I always thought was a really archaic and stilted way of saying, okay, it's a little bit something out of the ordinary to just let people know, hey, we're about to get started on something interesting. Why don't you come join us if you're on the fence, if you're not quite sure if you want to participate or not. You're going to set the expectation for what's going to happen, how long this is going to be, how physically strenuous, taking into account that the group is as strong, so to speak, as its weakest, so to speak, member, as mobile as the slowest person. And that is appropriate, that's respectful, right? We want to make sure that nobody gets dropped off the back of the peloton. A peloton is a group of bicyclists in a race, all wearing very tight clothes and hunched over, and when one person crashes in front, everybody crashes. That's a peloton. It's really sad to be like the slow person off the back of the bike race. So dropping somebody off the back, not a good thing. Not a good sensation for somebody who is trying to be invested in what you are putting out there. Okay? So the introduction does a couple of very specific things. It can do them in lots of different ways. There are a million different ways to open up an experience like this. At Mammoth Cave, it's a pretty nanny state sensation. They start with the serious safety talk. Hey, we're about to go into a cave, and you're going to climb and descend X hundreds of steps. We're going to go 2.1 miles. That 2.1 miles is going to take us 4.5 hours. This is a moderately difficult hike. If you have any heart conditions, for example, if you decide that you don't want to go on this cave tour before we go on the cave tour, no harm done. You can go back inside, you can get a 100% refund on your ticket, no questions asked. We're not going to make it weird. We just want to make sure that everybody is very confident that you can get into, and more importantly, get out of the cave. If there's some kind of rescue that needs to happen, it's going to take 6 or more hours to carry somebody out on a stretcher. Okay. So, the introduction covers a lot of that stuff. It's sort of boilerplatey things that we kind of have to say to make sure that everybody's going to have a good time. But we don't want to fall into the easy trap of thinking, yeah, this is just boilerplate stuff, let's just read through this fine print as fast as possible because the lawyers make us. This is also a way to communicate, hey, your safety is more than a box to check for me. I really care that not only are you safe, that you're comfortable, that you can be present, that you can really come and sink your fangs, so to speak, into this juicy content that we're about to jump into, okay? So, the way that you introduce, the way that you lead off your Tree Campus USA hike, or your cave tour, or what have you, all of that tone, all of that style, all of that context, and all of the assumptions baked in, all of the unspoken things, the tacit understanding that you're establishing with your participants, all of that happens in the introduction. From there, we outro from the introduction toward the theme. We're going to talk a lot about a theme this semester. You are going to be sick of me talking about the theme and what makes a good theme versus a topic and so forth, all throughout the semester. But everything flows from the theme. It is typically a 1-sentence long statement or interrogative, 10-cent word for a question. And it's designed to not just organize the content and help people make sense right from the first sentence of all of the content, but it's also designed to provoke, to start eliciting a response to communicate to folks, hey, this isn't an information transfer lecture. This is an experience, and it's an interactive experience between all of you and me, and all of you and each other, and each of you with yourself, and each of you with what it is we're talking about, what it is we're encountering on this hike. Okay? So that one sentence has to do a lot of things. It's going to be a very, very thoughtfully, carefully constructed statement or question. More on that later. From the presentation of the theme, which really sets our arc, sets the direction that we are going. From there, we get into what you and I expect or think about typically as the interpretation, the content, the so-called thematic points. And the content is kind of the middle section of the story, right? Typically, we're going to have between 5 and 7 thematic points. Whether or not the content is staffed, meaning presented by a live human being like you, the interpreter, or if it's non-staffed interpretation, if that's a non-staffed mode, each of those thematic points might be one or a couple of pages in a Junior Ranger guidebook. So, each of these thematic points is going to be like a subtopic under the topic identified by the theme. And it may be a big enough theme or topic area that each one of these content thematic points has its own kind of sub-theme. We'll get into that here in a bit. Then and only then do we actually get into the game that you're playing at this particular stop along the trail. Or talking about that huge flowstone formation, that speleothem, that stalactite or stalagmite or soda straw, or other cave stone formation in a karst cave environment. Or maybe your interpretive hike is on a water trail and nobody's hiking, everybody's paddling in a canoe or kayak or raft or what have you. In that case, that is also staffed interp, and maybe the content in that particular thematic point is at a particular gravel bar. So you paddle for 20 minutes and then everybody pulls off together. They all get to stretch their legs a little bit. Maybe some folks in the group are peak physical condition and they are good to paddle for hours and hours and hours, but that's not really the point of this flow trip. The flow trip is to get close and engage with some beautiful spots maybe, or some stories sequenced as sort of a meta-narrative that strings together different stops along that flow trip, okay? Lots of different ways you can do it. So, it takes a lot of precursors, antecedents, all the pregame, all the introduction, all the setting up of the theme and drafting that, and marshaling a bunch of content to get down to the point of the actual content. It's a lot to marshal, but that's okay, because we are explicitly, on purpose, in the gospel according to Freeman Tilden, the guy who wrote Interpreting Our Heritage and set up environmental interpretation with the United States National Park Service as a profession, a field of professional practice. We're talking about things that we love, things that are important to us, things that we're passionate about, or things that we're very concerned about, things that we think are very important but not really comfortable, nice, fuzzy, warm stories. We're talking about real things. So, in that way, it's okay that it's a ton of work to get to the content that everybody's expecting. There's a bunch of good scaffolding and structuring and planning to be done to get there. Once you talk about the particular stops, the particular tree, the particular gravel bars, funny historic story associated with it, or whatever, content of that thematic point, then even if that stop is, our rule of thumb is going to be 2 to 5 minutes of content for a guided hike's thematic points. 5 to 7 of those at 2 to 5 minutes each. is maybe a mile, maybe 2 if you're really moving fast, for an hour or 2. Okay? We're going to generally plan on moving up to 1 mile per hour on a guided hike, because the point isn't hiking for most of these hikes. The point is the content, and the hike is the bread by which the delicious sandwich of your interpretation is delivered. Okay? From there, even with just a 2 to 5 minute quick little game or discussion or one-to-many lecture, or however you decide to structure that content and deliver it, it's important to recap what was just said, because pretty much everybody is just hearing a lot of this stuff for the first time. And if you're really talking about something that is interesting and important and potentially even mind-blowing, you gotta give people, if their minds are blown, like a couple of seconds to pick up chunks of skull off the metaphorical ground and reassemble their understanding of what you just helped them to encounter for the first time. Alright? So it's like the old Baptist ministry model. Tell them what you're going to tell them what you're telling them, and then tell them what you told them. This is a way to help make sure that you're not losing anybody, because you're pretty familiar with this stuff, but nobody else might be. Don't want to make any assumptions, but don't want to drop anybody off the back by bad assumptions. So that recap and connect point might be a question to the group. It might be a rhetorical question where you're not expecting an answer back, and we can make that pretty clear, so not putting anybody on the spot. It might be a legit question. So what do you guys and gals think about this that we've just encountered here, even for just a couple of minutes? Let's get some reactions, some responses. What do you guys think about this? You don't have to agree with the perspective from which this was presented. You're a human being. You are a thinking, rational, and also feeling creature. You don't have to buy automatically what this content is selling, so to speak. Okay? So that recap and connect part, we gotta leave some time for that. Leave some space for that. Most importantly, leave some energy for that. Okay? Finally, transition out. You have in your head this outline, having developed it from filling in some pretty detailed templates that we'll see later on, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can plug in your important content to it and not have to think about that stuff. Everything needs a transition in and a transition out, so nobody has any idea how any of this stuff connects together unless you help make that part clear. It makes perfect sense to you. Remember, you're really passionate about this and you get it. Like, you get this at a DNA level. But everybody else might not yet. So, those transitions in and transitions out help people create what's called a cognitive map of starting with something that they're very familiar with, seems very normal, even mundane, or uninteresting, unremarkable, and then transition in helps understand where we're moving from a place of familiarity towards maybe a new or building familiarity. This is called cognitive map theory. And once it's time to move on to the next thing, we need to help folks understand we're moving on this conceptual or cognitive map. So far, so good? Cool. Rinse and repeat that thematic point part of this outline 5 to 7 times. Usually is a basic introductory rule of thumb that is meant to be broken, but mindfully broken. And then by the end of that time, people's brains and hearts might be kind of full. They might need to, go to the bathroom, have some lunch, sit down, right? So we conclude. And the conclusion is like the super version of the recap and connect part and the transition out. Just like the introduction, there's a bunch of specific things that we need to accomplish in that conclusion. We'll go through that in more detail later on. And then the thing is over. We're out of content. We've concluded it. And we've mapped everything together and we've sequenced everything on the fly, but very visibly or carefully with all those transitions. And so for your participants, the experience is over. we've spent our hour, we've gone on that loop hike, we've found some cool trees around campus, whatever the activity is. But for you, it's not. So as the professional, as the guide for folks through this conceptual topic and maybe even a literal landscape that you just walked through, you have a very special kind of momentary relationship with your participants. Even though the thing is formally done, you're still kind of, because this isn't just, you're not like a human iPod, for those of you who are old enough to remember iPods. You are a part of that conceptual landscape. You were the guy that brought them through. And so folks, if they started to sort of catch those sparks that you're sending off, and they're starting to ignite, metaphorically speaking, well then they might want to have a conversation with you afterwards. Like, what if you were talking about their ancestors? Like maybe your hike took everybody by an old cemetery site, overgrown in the middle of Thompson Woods or Shawnee National Forest or what have you. And you spend one of your thematic points at that place talking about what it might have been like to live on the landscape of what would later become the Shawnee National Forest. Somebody afterwards comes up and says, "You were leaning on my great-granduncle's Ebenezer's grave marker. That was pretty cool." That's exciting. That person, like, they're engaged, they're present with you. And in a vast, disconnected, unfeeling, over-marketed, over-sexed society that we live in, that connection is kind of a miracle. And really important. Like, those conversations, maybe it's a family, and the little kid on your hike is just absolutely enchanted with you, Ranger Mahaji or whomever. And that is the moment where they decide they want to be used someday. Now, that's a legit connection. That's a pretty powerful hike. To give somebody the spark of an idea to set their entire career direction as a little kid. My wife knew from about age 6 that she wanted to be a veterinarian. What is she? She's a veterinarian. And that happened not in a vacuum, right? She met some veterinarians that she admired very much at that age and carried it through. Okay? So, this wrap-up after action section isn't necessarily very long. It's open-ended. It's a lot like when hopefully all of your professors are saying, "Hey, as we're packing up, class is over. I know some of you got to get to your next class. But if you have any questions, I'm here right now. Let's talk while this is fresh on your mind. Or come find me during office hours. I would love to talk your ear off about this stuff if you have any questions beyond what we have time for in lecture." Not all professors are wired that way. Some are, right? Some like overteach, like they really want to know. But that's okay. Some professors are pretty passionate about what we research. So that wrap up after action section is like, to them the schedule is over. For you, this is just the next part of the schedule. And then at the very, very end, you send a clear signal, "Hey guys, it's not you, it's me. I gotta go reset for the next group of folks. I gotta go collect myself, because I just extroverted for an hour and a half and 2 miles, and I'm mentally kind of wrung out a little bit. I need to go just be quiet and alone for a minute." In so many words. You wouldn't say that, right? That would make it weird. But if that's what you need to do professionally to reset so that the next group has a really excellent version of you for that hour and a half, whatever it is, well then, that's what you need to do. It's called breaking up with the audience. And that is explicitly a part of the more detailed outline that we'll see later on the semester. Okay? So, with that long preamble, we're a half an hour into class. Now we know what your activity for today's class, writing some of the actual content for one particular tree along this tree campus hike, what the context for that might look like. Okay. Cool. Let's pause right there for a sec. If you would like to, let's stretch your legs a little bit. We're going to move into a more interactive section of the class where we just kind of try out a couple of these different, have in our mind's eye because it's gross and cold and wet and muddy out there, and we'll shred the soil as we go walking it back to the redwood. But we'll kind of see what thoughts a couple of you guys and gals had and see where you want to take it. Okay, so take a quick break, stretch your legs, get some water if you would like to. We'll buddy up and start working through some of these here in a bit. Totally forgot about this assignment. Like, this is your chance to like get some mom here for 3 minutes.
I didn't forget it. I put it down. I just forgot to bring it with me.
Yeah.
So I was able to bring it up on my phone and just jot it down real quick what I typed up. But
There you go. That'll work. That'll do. Yeah. So we'll jump in with this Don Redwood as just a concrete starting point, but pretty soon this semester, one of my favorite parts of this class is we like transition away from like Dr. Park choosing the Don Redwood and volunteering everybody to do that, onto like, what are you interested in interpreting this semester? Be all kinds of stuff. So we'll see.
you know, the other day there was a class you're talking about artifacts and you ever found any kind of artifacts or anything like that?
Yeah. I wish I'd found arrowheads and spear points and stuff like that, but yeah, I mean, when you really kind of slow down to look at places, there's
I've always wanted to find one. Last year I found a spearhead, a complete arrowhead, 3 broken arrowheads, and a hoe.
Wow. Okay. Was it like a farm where they were tilled up, or like a road cut side, or what?
I won't necessarily say where they came from.
Fair.
But actually one of them I did find in my yard tilling the garden up.
Yeah, right on. That's wild to think about, huh? I was reading the other day in the news, for those of you who know anything about Israel, they just uncovered what's called the Pool of Siloam, where some allegedly miraculous acts were recorded in the New Testament. Like, they found it, like that particular thing, and they're going to reopen it in a couple of years. They're doing the excavation now and all the categorizing and measurements and all that stuff, but they're going to reopen the pool.
This is the dark head I found.
Oh, that's sweet.
Let me find this. I found the coolest arrowhead I've ever seen.
Oh, wow, yeah. Nicely done, man.
I like that one. This one was hard to tell, but I had somebody look at it. It's what they consider a hoe. The way it's shaped,
Yeah.
they'd hoe the ground with it.
Okay. Yeah, and you can see the lash line, the handle.
Yep.
Yep. There you go. Nice work, man.
Yeah, it was the first one I found. I was pretty thrilled with it.
Okay. Cool. So at this point, we're not going to put anybody on the spot like one against the many up in front of the group. Go ahead and just find a classmate, maybe somebody you know, or somebody you'd be curious to get to know a little bit better. And we'll take about 5 minutes to share back and forth. This was what I thought I could talk about with this Don Redwood. I didn't know anything about Don Redwoods before looking at this stuff on Monday afternoon, but I found some interesting stuff online. I thought I might sort of sequence or format it such and such, and then switch roles. So the two of you have a couple minutes to kind of take each other through. You don't have to like take the other person through as an interpretive experience. Just kind of talk the person through, like, what's on my outline. Sound good? All right. Find a classmate to partner up with and take 5 minutes to share bi-directionally.
Oh, Gary. So this was hard for me because I wanted to, if I don't know what I'm talking about yet, then, you know, start getting right without starting to material, I guess. But I kind of did outline sort of those more, not necessarily scientifically connected, but emotionally connected, based off like sort of things like that. So I kind of thought about making a comparison between, you know, the seeds being
We have an odd number of people.
and then, you know, there's a variety of different ways people are looking at them. Some kind of conflicting about, you know, having seeds come in from different places. And then also having a discipline behind they kind of comparing that to like immigration in the US and like, yeah, same idea. Settling, just making roots in some kind of legacy, whether that be like a small family legacy or that was kind of my wild idea from it. But you?
I did more like a timeline.
Okay.
Dawn Redwood was known for a long time.
Yeah.
Basically false.
Okay.
You know, they didn't know it was still around, but they found it in China. And I kind of did timeline. Grandma Mary was a professor here. 43, they found the tree. World War, you know, didn't stop the study. In 47, Harvard funded an expedition to get seeds. 1915, Planet One, or 47, the seeds were sent to a bunch of botanical gardens. In 50, one was planted here. In 51, they became part of commercial culture trade. They're risking their extinction now for deforestation in the wild. A little bit about how much they grow. And then now there's about 5,300 trees. I was going to do like a timeline.
I love that. Yeah.
I had to find out much information.
You know what? The David.
Yeah, Google his name. Make it easy.
The only reason I know last name is because of the Arboretum. I grew up in Carbondale, the Canton area, so it's like,
I've been to it, but I didn't even be honest with them. They just walked around. Yeah, the only thing I found is he was a tree. And he was from SIU.
So was he on the Harvard expedition, or was that's what they did? Okay, because that was like or was it train out like or like that's what's training.
Well, he never said anything about if he got it with original seed dispersal or what.
Well, I thought Dr. Parker replied that he thought it came from collected seeds there in his they call it Canada, right?
Very well, because I found that information. I found out that Arena named after him. He was a professor of botany. It's only two things that came up that he played out on.
Okay.
I was just got to 10 minutes, so I didn't get where we were meeting. So I said it was a tree center.
Yeah. No, I knew if I invested more than like, you know, 10 minutes of like putting time in here, I was gonna write a whole book about something. And I really didn't need to do that. I was like, that's not what he wants. And I was like, I have to write a script. And then as soon as we walked in, he's like, I hope you didn't write a script. Sounds good. Seems like you and I did something pretty different project. I feel like it's for having a tree and how there isn't more information on it, you know.
Especially when information's out of here.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
Even the article that it went out.
No.
Well, I mean, it's got directions and a brief overview and it.
versus but yeah, there's no it's like a bio or something.
How we doing? Anybody need more time? Okay, cool. Let's come on back together as a group and across any of the pairs, did any of the pairs have like kind of the same exact stuff from both people? No? That's interesting. Yeah? So our first kind of target of opportunity lesson here is that you are free as the interpreter to explicitly editorialize, to pick a perspective on first your topic from which we're going to build that theme, that all-important theme, and from there do some hard picking and choosing and prioritizing on what specifically is going to make it into these thematic points. And if everybody has something a little bit different here, that's a pretty good illustration of it's valid to have something a little bit different. So, for example, for this class, about half the time we go to Mammoth Cave National Park as our field trip. And we more or less go on the same 2 or 3 different cave tours that, crisscross over each other and use a lot of the same access routes because there's a limited number of different ways to go in Mammoth Cave, even as sponged and variegated as those paths are. And I have not once experienced the same cave tour in going there something like 20 different times and going on 40 or 50 different cave tours over the years. And that's interesting to me. Like, it's the same place. It should get pretty bland after a while, but it doesn't. It really just doesn't. One really interesting thing that they do for somebody paying attention to the design of interpretation, one really interesting thing that they do with their non-staffed interpretation is that they'll also have, like, there's an enslaved people's cemetery at Mammoth Cave. It's in Kentucky. It was a slave state. And some of the very first high-skill cave guides, like Stephen Bishop, were enslaved people. And it's a really, really, really interesting set of stories. They had a genuinely unique American experience, that particular small set of folks. And so anyway, there's a cemetery, set aside for them. And there's a self-guided hike out to it. It's 200 or 300 yards away along one of the ridge lines, overlooking the Green River, out from the lodge and visitor center, a little bit closer to the plateau country. But every once in a while, we'll catch a guided tour that uses the self-guided tour, and you go to the cemetery, and they'll actually open the gate to the cemetery. They don't let self-guided tour folks do that. And you go in, and you go way deeper on a dive. And each one of those is different because there are so many stories attached with the people buried in that small. That cemetery is half the size of this room. It's not very big. But there's so much rich history. There is so much commentary on just the human condition and what it was like to live in a segregated society and a society that used slavery and so forth. And there's a million things you could talk about. Every single one of those times is different. So that's cool. This is me giving you explicit permission this semester to take whatever topics we have, whether it's one that I'm volunteering everybody to start with, like the Dawn Redwood here, just as an easy pickup example, to any of the topics that you actually care about personally and might enjoy interpreting this semester. Okay? So, all that long dog and pony show to get us to this point. Would anybody like to share what you, just as a first preliminary draft, assembled about this Dawn Redwood or William Marbury or any other part of anything suggested by our introductory topic, the Dawn Redwood. I heard some pretty good ones walking around.
I kind of went more the route with William Marbury.
Okay.
I started off talking about his education, that he graduated from SIU, so trying to connect with that. Then eventually that he joined the Air Force in 1942. He was stationed in India, China, and Burma. He collected a lot of plants. Then he had these oriental trees from Forbidden City in China. And he planted like a ton of ponderosa in the area because he was a park ranger in Yosemite. And he collected a bunch of artifacts from like just random areas like stone mason stuff and like just regular like rocks. And he would get like the athletes and stuff like that to help him like carry him around like campus. So he's just kind of like a hoarder of like stuff that he'd find in the area. And eventually he had a peach farm and he turned that into the arboretum in the area.
Right on. A peach farm into an arboretum. Okay. Just as a brief side note about arboretums or arboreta, did anybody think when we were listening to Shelton Johnson the other day and he was talking about how the first arboretum was built by Buffalo soldiers, African American military guys? It's a building that you build by chopping down trees to stick tree specimens in. Have you ever thought about the idea of an arboretum as a structure made out of wood? I don't know. It's like a chicken palace made out of chickens. Anyway, okay, moving on. Anybody else? Anybody else connect anything that you found biographically, Mr. Marbury, or biologically about Dawn Redwood that we can connect to the personal lived experience of somebody that you're leading through this interpretation? So not just what is the fact, but what is any way that somebody can connect with that or see some kind of meaningful parallel or meaningful invitation to explore more about or anything like that. This is a much harder thing. So it's okay if you're not real sure at this point about it, right? We're right at the start of the semester, no big deal. But out of curiosity, does anybody have any sense of connection content-wise?
I wasn't really sure how to connect it, but I know a lot about the Dawn Redwood. I know that it was actually thought to be extinct in 1944. It's actually found in fossils. The coins and things are found in fossils, and they're actually related to Dawn redwoods. I mean, they're related to the redwoods in America, but they're much, much older. They were around during the dinosaur age. I think they're beautiful. Instead of spiral leaf arrangements like the original redwood, they actually have opposite arrangements. That's how they were able to see the biological differences. But they're originally from China, and they're very beautiful trees. You can grow them into a bonsai as well. You put them down. They can live 500 years or so. They can live for a very, very long time. And I was comparing that to the plaque for him, 1913 to 1984. His legacy lives on through the tree. That tree will be here even though he's not, but the value of education. No one can take the knowledge that you gain here, at your educational institution, away from you. Anything else can be thrown away or taken away from you, but not that knowledge and that education, so it lives on. So in a way, it's a legacy for him, and then also with him going into the military, I can really connect with that because I'm from the military. And before I knew about forestry and tree and plant development, personally, we were doing training. We weren't caring about trees. We were running them over with Humvees, and then NRCS and those different people would come and yell at us, and we're just like, what? We're training, and I didn't know. And I feel really bad now because I'm in school, and it's like, wow, I didn't know any better. And maybe it's a way for him to compensate for the damage that he did elsewhere, or maybe during that time period, a lot of things that he didn't know, and he came back and who wants to make a difference and show other people that you can change your mind or that education is really important and that you can impact people in a positive way.
Awesome. Okay. So, do you see how Mahaji took us from the Dawn redwood species and some biological facts about it? What is its region or country of origin? How long does it typically live? And then from there, it was a pretty short, easy, clear connection between that and this got here by a person. And this tree is part of that person's legacy. If you've ever thought about what's the meaning of life, why am I here, or what should I do with my life, is a pretty normal question to be thinking about while you're in college, and all the other times as well, but particularly in college as you're, skilling up to jump off into whatever it is you want to jump off into. Those are big questions. Those are ubiquitous questions. Everybody's wondering about it, but nobody's talking about it. And so Mahaji now has given us permission or license to talk about some important stuff. So yeah, we learn a few things about the Dawn redwood. We start to acquire more of a sense of awareness about the trees around us. Oh, I wonder if this other random tree that is not shaped or has a life form like any of the other trees around it here on campus, I wonder if that's a transplant or a pioneer or a borrow from halfway across the planet or something like that. And also a chance to think about and invite people's discussion, thoughts, impressions on some of these deeper questions, things that can't be answered with biological factoids. Like, what is the point of me being here? Does anybody ever have regrets, ever? I mean, I know we all have the knuckle tattoos, no regrets, but if you've ever had a moment of regret about something, well, Mahaji's using a tree to talk about a very common human sensation. Unless you're a psychopath, right? You're going to experience regret at points in your life. Nobody makes it through perfectly the first time, and none of us gets out alive. So, we can start thinking about something like dying someday and making our life until that moment count for something. Maybe. Like William Marbury did. Maybe. Okay? This is interpretation. We can start with some facts and some factoids and some unusual plant species with unusual stories and get to something that is inviting folks to think a lot harder, a lot deeper, in a much more productive way, as it turns out. Instead of just idly thinking, oh, I wonder what I should do with my life, or just sitting on the toilet, scrolling the gram or whatever. Like, you can stand and think about it while you're looking at a Dawn redwood tree that's gonna most likely outlive most or all of us, unless we hit Ray Kurzweil's singularity and upload ourselves onto Facebook. Okay? Who knows? It's all a big mystery. But that's how we're gonna use this professional outline, this scaffolding, this context, to get from things that are obvious, things that folks thought they were coming for. But we're going to go much deeper than that, because we want to honor folks' presence and time and attention and get at stuff that maybe matters more than which particular sub-region or province of modern-day China the Dawn redwood comes from. Sound good? All right. Let's take a step back from the one tree exercise. Pass those to this side, and then forward. And we'll give you credit for your work on those. Pass them back. And let's go back to that list of things that you actually care about. So I'm not going to operate under the illusion that I magically got it right for anybody. Maybe you really have a thing for Dawn redwoods, and if that's you, man, nice. Okay? But maybe not. And if Dawn redwood's on the list of things that you are interested and actually care about, then let's take a sec here to look for now a third time at this list of 5+ things that are important to you, that are central to you, maybe even defining for you. Things like your passions, like stronger than hobbies. Things like your faith. Things like your background. Things like any of the problems facing humanity. And oh yeah, we're a part of humanity. It's not that we're trapped with them. It's that they're trapped here on Earth with us. Okay? Take a look at the list of things that are important to you. In particular, anything that is conceptual. Anything on that list that is interesting to you. If you're not comfortable sharing that thing or interpreting about it this semester, like weaving together stuff like Dawn Redwoods and questions of existential dread, that's fine. But if there is something on that list that can sort of comfortably be shared with the crew, if it's a big question, like what am I going to do with my life? And you've been wondering that, maybe it keeps you up at night. I bet somebody else in the room is thinking the same thing. So we could imagine interpretation about Mr. Marbury. And it's ostensibly about his interesting story and how he came to bring Dawn Redwoods and a whole bunch of other species back to the Arboretum and here to campus. But the conversation is really about how he decided what to do with his life. And how he didn't just decide once, but he confronted that a bunch of different times from different places all over the world and did some different things along the way. And so his story is not a single thread or through line. For most of us, our story is not going to be a single thread or through line. It's going to be a whole bunch of things weaving together. Opportunities, personal calamities and disasters, health changes, all kinds of stuff, right? Who you marry, if that's your jam. Whatever. How many kids you have, if that's your jam. What do you do professionally? Where do you do it? Do you middle finger to the professional world and go hop trains and see the world for free and just kind of bounce around for a while? I mean, I've never done that myself, but I assume that's just as legit as being a professor, right? Well, now to yuck somebody else's yum. So, take a look at your list and see what on that list is amenable to interpretation this semester for you. And add to your list. Again, I'm not ever going to see this list. This is a working document for you. But take a second look at this list now with an eye toward how can any of the topics on my list, the things that are important to me, the people, the places, the events and experiences, the concepts, the phenomena that are important to me, can any of those pair with something kind of obvious and basic? Like a Dawn Redwood, a tree on campus, which is a starting point for talking about much more interesting things than just Dawn Redwoods. Dawn Redwoods are interesting, don't get me wrong. What I'm saying, they can function as more than just that species. They can be a jumping off point for us. Okay. What are some of the topics to help you think about this? This is a question to the entire class, a non-rhetorical question, meaning discussion invited. What are some topics that you have ever seen interpreted at a national park on your family vacation 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or on any of your field trips, or on summer camp, or anything like that? Any of the topics that you have seen interpreted? Mike.
The fire history of giant sequoias.
The fire history of giant sequoias. I love the word sequoia. That many vowels in a row. Oh man, freezing on down my spine every time. Love it. Okay. Mahaji,
that Mammoth Cave?
Mammoth Cave. There's a bunch of topics connected with Mammoth Cave, like speleology. Also a good word, speleology. And the birth of the United States National Park Service has some pretty close ties to Mammoth Cave. So you can have some interesting conversations about how do we as Americans want to be? How do we want to do being American? We think national parks are a part of that. And we're going to need a pretty expert cadre of folks, men and women, to get some good things done to make sure those parks don't implode under the weight of use. Awesome list so far. What else? What are some other things that you've seen interpreted to you at Crab Orchard or another national park? Not that Crab Orchard is a national park. Yeah.
Native people who lived on the land.
Native people who lived on the land. Living on the land? All right. That's a weird phrase, living on the land. We all live on the land. I'm stepping on it right now. I mean, it's clad in ceramic and mortar armor between my feet and the land, but I live on the land. Like, I walk barefoot sometimes, you know. It counts. All right.
They don't feed wildlife.
Don't feed the wildlife. Keep wildlife wild. Yeah. Others. There's another hand I didn't get to you. Here.
The Underground Railroad.
Underground Railroad. Okay. There's a rich history of that right here in Southern Illinois. Really cool stuff. Yeah.
Local first settlers
First settlers?
in that area, a lot of times.
Running out of room here. Speleology doesn't have much to do with settlers, but what was it like to strike westward from a growing East Coast American city into the big dark forest, which didn't necessarily feel real safe, but also felt maybe for some people, a lot of people, like a whole lot of opportunity? Okay. There's a lot of stories there too. A ton of stories along those lines that we'll see on our field trip heading west into Missouri. Okay? So, do you see how each of these has a bunch of historical, geographic, biological, what have you, facts associated with them? Entire textbooks on every single one of these. And that's too much, and it's not the right thing to land on real hard with a 1 hour hike. Or a 4x6 foot tipped back, UV stabilized, printed on durable aluminum substrate sign that is non-staffed interpretation, maybe along a hike. Anybody ever seen like outdoor signs that the Park Service has a very specific format that they use, a black bar across the top? Yeah. Okay? We'll talk about all that design and material selection and stuff like that later on. Cool. Okay. So, using this list here of things that the Park Service, things that river-to-river environmental educator folks interpret about, things that National Association of Interpreter folks interpret about, and so forth, on down the list. Can you see among your personally important things, and even just this very short starter list, anything that overlaps conceptually in any way? Cool. All right. So next to the thing on your list note the thing off of this super introductory short list that might be a way to talk about or introduce the importance of the thing that is important to you. Okay. So when you hire on at Mammoth Cave as a 1039 seasonal 6-month environmental interpreter, GS6 or whatever, for your next summer job or whatever, and you show up on day one and they give you some time to get your feet on the ground and orient to the park and the cave system and all of the human history and human ecology and rural sociology and stuff, everything that's going on above and below ground on the human side of things at this park and around it. They open up the floodgates, they open up the archives, the research archives at each national park, wherever you're at, and say, okay, we have some tours, we have some interpretive opportunities. The campfire talks at Mammoth Cave are awesome. They build these huge bonfires. They've got a PowerPoint screen at their campfire. It's ridiculous. It's gosh darn ridiculous. And so they build this big fire. Everybody's respiring a whole bunch of carbon dioxide into the air. It brings all the mosquitoes in from all of the woods on 3 sides of that amphitheater. And mosquitoes bring in the bazillions of bats, at least the ones that are left after GM-Isis Struck-Dan's white nose syndrome worked its way through the population and killed like 99% of them. But they're bouncing back. They're back and they're badder than ever. All right, I'm pretty hungry these days. So you're sitting there and you're hearing these real high-pitched click sounds, which are the refracted echolocation and navigation efforts of the bats seeking prey that you drove and neatly collected around this bonfire, which is also giving off a lot of carbon dioxide and so forth. And on some level, it doesn't even matter what you're talking about as the interpreter. Because people are like, that's a bat! That's a bat! It's flying in my hair! Oh my god! Where are the marshmallows? There's this 6-foot wide bonfire over here. Let's make marshmallows and get sugared out, Mom. Let's do this. Okay? You could be talking about brick making, and people would still be excited to be there. That's how powerful it is to give people permission to come learn cool stuff with you. And then watch their minds kind of explode as you say, hey, we're going to talk about brick making, enslaved peoples, the Underground Railroad through Kentucky, speleology, first settlers through the area, whatever. And we're going to see how these folks face a lot of the same questions and concerns that you do these days. Anybody hate going to the doctor or the dentist? Yeah, so did a lot of them. Okay? And they didn't have painkillers like we do, or low anxiety dentistry where they gas you out and just, do whatever they need to and run you in the kitchen sink. And, somebody else drives you home. Okay? So we can relate with them. They weren't just people on a page. Like, they lived lives. They confronted all the same questions, or a lot of the same questions that you and I do. Now, from that footing, let's talk about what it was like to be an enslaved person, based on everything that we can reconstruct, based on a bunch of first-hand testimonies that I went and looked up in the National Parks Library over here. These long transcribed interviews with folks telling things about how it really was firsthand. And oh, by the way, their great-grandkids, they live a quarter of a mile from this campground to this day. And so on and so forth. Like, you connect the abstract, somebody just on a page or on a black and white grainy daguerreotype or photograph from the 1800s or whatever, to the real lived experience of real people nearby, and then to the people sitting there in that amphitheater, warming their cockles by the bonfire, and so on and so forth. Okay. Cool. So, look, is there anything on this list, or on any sort of longer expanded list of other interpretive topics that you've encountered in the past that overlap in any way with something that's important to you? We don't want to make the mistake of artificial enthusiasm this semester. Like, you're going to work your butt off professionally, whenever you graduate, whatever you end up doing, it's, you know, that's why they call it work. It's sometimes. And that's fine. But if you can connect it to something that you're passionate about, something that seems really pretty important to you, a lot of those rough edges of the difficulty of work, the struggle of creating order from chaos in the cold, unfeeling, vast universe, well, it sure does work a lot better. Okay. So, take some time to do that. Mahaji, you had a question or comment?
Oh, no, I
Okay. All right. Let's see here. All right. Let's take just another quick stretch break, about 2 minutes. Stretch break we need. And we'll come back to and pivot away from the Don Redwood for a while. Things that youngs care about. 2 minutes. Right back to it. We're just gonna hang out and stretch our legs a little bit. For anybody who was not here on Monday and is in catch-up mode, we talked a good bit about literal language, like factual, straightforward, information transfer language. So facts, factoids, stuff like that, textbook language, over to figurative language. So we introduced the idea of this semester we're going to be wrestling with about 35 to 40 different kinds of figurative language. And on Monday we had a chance to take a look at some examples of analogies, so explaining something unfamiliar in terms of something more familiar that works in the same way or is shaped the same way conceptually or has similar characteristics or attributes. It's an analogy. And also metaphor, a closely related figurative language technique where you describe something that's familiar using unrelated or initially unrelated terms. So we talked about if you're in a hurry, you jet down the highway, except that you're not actually jetting, you're driving. Or you hammer down the throttle, but you're not actually using a hammer. Or you slide into a parking spot, or you slide into someone's DMs these days, but you're not actually sliding, you're using internet protocol digital communications. There's no sliding involved, ones and zeros. So a metaphor is using unrelated terms to describe something in a more evocative way. All right, we got most everybody back, or anybody still in the lab, the washroom, lavatory? Next move from here is to make kind of a double pivot. We're going to move from the Dawn Redwood to, at your discretion, if you would like to, one of the topics that you are more comfortable with, maybe in combination with something that is sort of a normal or usual or well mapped out way to introduce that topic. So it doesn't have to be something specifically on this list. So for example, speleology, the study of cave systems and cave ecology. If you have a particular, let's say a particular swimming hole that you are super excited about, like it defined your childhood, to spend your entire summer at this swimming hole, and you met your first significant other that summer at the swimming hole or whatever, and it occupies a place in your heart. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with speleology, but maybe if you're a forest hydro person, channel morphology. And we're talking about channel morphology, but we're really talking about first loves, swimming holes, and so on and so forth. See how that works? All right. So you're not certainly limited to anything on this list, whatever sort of makes sense according to your topics. So that's the first pivot, from Dawn Redwood to something hopefully that you're a little bit more interested in and passionate about. The second part of our pivot is going to be from describing content about that chosen topic area that you have. We're going to transform that topic into some kind of a theme. It's a little bit bass-backwards to develop the content first because everything flows from the theme. The theme is helping you say yes to a few really important characteristics or aspects or perspectives on your content. And more importantly, because you're selecting an important topic, that helps you to say no to all the stuff that isn't important enough in your content to survive that editing down process. Think about how much you know about the stuff that you're passionate about. And when you really love somebody or something or somewhere, it's kind of almost automatic to deep dive in on it. Read up on it, you want to know that person, or you talk with them, like you stare lovingly into their eyes, you get to know whatever. Like you get to know a lot of this stuff. And that's too much, unfortunately, for an interp encounter, an interp experience of an hour or two, something like that. We gotta be able to say no to things. So the theme is what helps us do that. So let's talk just briefly about what a theme kind of looks like, what it is, and I'll give you a couple of pretty hard and fast rules for our purposes, but these are rules that you can break in a professional context if you know why you're breaking. And then from here, our next little chunk of work, following our first thematic point, is going to be to write a couple, just two, kind of draft theme statements about a topic of your choice. It could be something we've supplied here, completely irrespective of your personal list. If you're not comfortable with sharing anything on your personal list, that's fine. Or it could be something that's a hybrid between the two, sort of a joining of sort of a public and private topic, or something that you're comfortable talking about, whatever, doesn't matter. All right, so our next homework assignment will be 2 theme statements according to the following rules for us guidelines for pros. It's going to be 1 complete sentence. Every sentence has a subject and a predicate. The what and the doing. And because it's a sentence, it needs punctuation. So if you're the kind of writer that ends up with statements like this sentence, no verb, theme's got to be, unfortunately, syntactically complete. Subject, predicate, and punctuation. The punctuation might be a period, just a statement. X, Y, Z, period. It might be a question mark. It can be an interrogative. You can pose people questions. And the way the human brain works is you cannot read or hear a question and avoid thinking about some kind of an answer. Marketers love to use this language. Are you familiar with the term clickbait? Could this one interpretive theme writing technique upend the entire professional world? Question mark. Probably not, but maybe. Maybe. And in that moment, you have to consider what the maybe might be, how big that is. All right. We mentioned before that your hook needs, or excuse me, your theme needs to provoke. And in order to provoke, it needs to adopt a particular perspective. Your theme cannot be, it will not be just a phrase, because that's not a complete sentence. And because a noun is not a perspective. The topic of enslaved people is a noun phrase. It doesn't have any perspective. It doesn't have any sense of discernment or judgment or evaluation of that topic. There's no sense of it. It's just a noun, just a phrase. Okay? Life is short. Interpretive experiences are very short relative to a human life, and we don't have time for noun phrases that don't do any work. All right, so it's going to provoke. What it is provoking is some emotion, surprise, humor, concern, low-key revulsion, interest, and so on and so forth down the line. If we get into some of the real hot emotions like fiero or anger, just in the theme statement, we're cooking on gas. So we need to be careful and professional and ethical about the response that we are seeking to provoke. Let's not harbor any illusions. Like a book title has one shot, one opportunity, one spaghetti to catch a reader's interest for an entire book-length piece of work. It's gotta provoke. It's gotta sound interesting in some way. Unless it's a textbook, and then it can be boring, that's kind of the point. But we are solidly at the far end of the spectrum. We are seeking deliberately to professionally and ethically provoke some kind of an emotional response, not a reaction. That's a little bit too spicy, but some kind of emotional response. Okay? We make decisions, we initiate actions, most of us, at this level. Not at a highly reasoned, ethical, highly informed, intellectual level. We do at this level. Got it? Alright, cool. Subject, predicate, punctuation. It's got to provoke from an explicit perspective and convey some sense of some kind of emotion in order to do it. Alright, there are more guidelines. This is a good start for right now. So, fresh sheet of paper. First line. Write your topic. A word, a phrase identifying a place, person, phenomenon, species, historical epoch, whatever that you'd like to kind of explore interpreting throughout this semester. It could be something as abstract as backpack, There's a million different directions you could go inside of that. A million different directions you could go inside of climate change. Whatever that topic is for you, doesn't matter to me. You don't get graded on it. How can I grade it? How? But we want to have that topic clearly in mind and written on that first line so that we don't stay at the topic. We're going to take that topic and start working on a one-sentence perspective that invites folks to engage with this thing. Okay. So, again, we have other specific requirements that we're going to get into, but for now it's enough to put pencil to paper. And it's okay if it's a pencil. This is a first draft effort. And condense meaning from the vapor of nuance. All of the things that you are thinking about and evaluating your topic on, chosen topic. Let's make some of those perspectives that you hold about it, some of those concerns you have about it, or some of those opinions you have about it, explicit. Make them into this sentence. By way of example for you, since this is one of those open-ended exercises that can go a million different ways, I'll use the Dawn Redwood that we've been talking about as my topic and provide one or a couple of theme statements that might sort of work to start off an interpretive hike centered around the Dawn Redwood. So, topic for me, Dawn Redwood. Topic is a phrase, not a full sentence, so we gotta go from there. From my topic of Dawn, Dawn Redwood. I can identify it in a specific way by identifying a role that it plays, or a role that I feel is important that it plays. Dawn redwoods, like every organism, do a lot of things in their ecosystem and their setting. Dawn redwoods echo to us. We'll hear later about active verbs. We'll hear later about using attributional language. You, we, us, our, together, etc. We want to identify the participant's relationship to the topic in this theme sentence. Don't worry about that yet. Dawn redwoods echo to us dinosaur stories of an ancient landscapes. This is a more interesting way of starting to allude to something that Mahaji told us. The Dawn redwood species, or its close antecedent, its predecessor, it's a couple of 100 million years old. But it being a couple 100 million years old, it's a fact. It's not. Maybe it's a little interesting, but it doesn't affect us. I'm a meat space, meat-wear human being. In cyberpunk, I'm like the regular guy walking down the street without any wetwear. Meat space. I can't, in my head, conceive of 200 million M&Ms. I don't know how big that is. I don't know how much chocolate delight and how much is different about the green ones for a number that big. I can't think about that number. So instead, I'm going to move away on purpose from a big round number like 200 million years, or whatever the specific number is. We want to be factually correct in our interpretation. But we're really only starting with factoids. We're getting to some sense, even in this first sentence of the whole pile of content, what this means to us. Why should I care about Don Redwoods? Why should I give you an hour of my time on this hike? Why should I? Why do I care? Okay? So, taking a perspective on things means making some value judgments about it. Why is the Don Redwood useful or important to us? It's not a huge economic driver species, certainly not in Southern Illinois at least. So why should I care? What's interesting about this? What's the short version? What is the explainer? Okay, so right from the beginning, right in sentence 1, I have a sense of, okay, there's a story here. You and I are built to understand and reach for stories. Has anybody ever seen the face on the front of a Jeep? Or have you ever seen like a little surprise face in electrical outlets? That's weird, because those aren't faces. But your brain and my brain are constantly looking for meaning in the noise, in the chaos, in the randomness of things. We look for and we find faces. We look for and we find hunters, swans, crabs called cancer, rams, all sorts of creatures in the firmament, the stars up above, the however many billions of stars there are out there. We look for shapes in that. And then we attach meaning to these ostensibly random shapes, depending on your theology. And we attach stories. We look for meaning in something that may not, on the face of it, look like it has any meaning, like the spatial relationship from our perspective on Earth, in the Sol system, in the Milky Way galaxy, of a whole bunch of other stars and galaxies. We look for those stories. We can't not look for that. Okay? Don Redwood's echo to us. Dinosaur stories of an ancient landscape. All right. So this is going to be story time. We're going to be living in the land of the lost. Little cartoon. You guys ever see the Dinosaurs TV show that ended with the Super Grim? Love it. Anyway, we look for those stories. We make up stories out of whole cloth, and we use those stories to distill meaning, to distill wisdom, to convey hard-won lessons, so that others can learn from our failures, so that others can avoid heartache and pain and troubles and strife that we have hit. And if we can convey that in a story, we can save somebody else a little bit of pain. Or we can invite them into something good, right? It's not all gloom and doom. Some stories are a pretty good thing. Has anybody seen any of the David Attenborough nature documentaries, like any of them? He's got some super new ones on, I don't know, Disney or Hulu or whatever, one of these streaming services where it is photorealistically rendered dinosaurs. And they have their little babies and stuff like that. And he's narrating like this nature documentary of these synthetically constructed dinosaurs, but extremely convincing ones. And you get emotional, you get like wrapped up. Like when the Tyrannosaurus Rex is swimming with her babies across a narrow channel, and then you start seeing a wake coming in from the side, one by one. The baby T-Rexes start dropping under the surface, vanishing as they get picked off by the Maiasaur, the Plesiosaur, or whatever. It hurts right here, and they're totally made up in some computer. But we live and understand the world by stories. We populate those stories, in our case, with facts. But we format it as stories. Okay? So, in my theme statement, I'm using explicitly the word stories to clue people in. Alright, this is going to be story time. We're not talking about lumber operations. We're not talking about allelopathy. We're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about some stories. You don't have to be a forester to connect with something meaningful and good for this next hour on this hike. And then go grab some ice cream back at the lodge and stretch out your legs, and we'll see you at amphitheater tonight with bats in your hair. Okay, moving on. Does this make sense? Alright, so stepping back, remember, just picking a topic, any topic you like. And you're not locked into this topic for the rest of the semester either. Just pick a topic. Write that topic, word, or phrase at the top of the paper. And then try to take some perspective, some value communication about the topic as a single sentence. When you got one, try for a second. Take pictures of these so that your classmates who are not here today, some hope are following along. Here's another for you, as you're thinking about yours. Dawn Redwoods. Silent. Oh, God. Okay. Stand. Sentinel. Over the lives of XYZ. Villagers who live in stands of Dawn Redwoods over east in China. Or woodland or forest creatures that make their homes in Dawn Redwood sands. Okay? And imagine punctuation. Probably in this case just a period. It'd be a little bit weird if it was like Dawn Redwood silently stands sentinel over the lives of XYZ! Exclamation point. Like, why are we shouting? No. But we also don't want to come across confused. Dawn Redwood stands sentinel over the lives of squirrels? Question mark? Okay. So, don't be afraid to choose anything other than a period, but make sure it makes sense, of course. All right. We've got about 10 minutes left. Let's go ahead and find another partner, a different person this time, and share with that person your first draft of a first sentence connected to the topic that you chose. 10 minutes. We'll come back together in about 4 or 5. This is a pretty quick exercise.
Yeah.
You don't need to evaluate the other person. If they're feeling a little bit stuck, you can brainstorm with them. We're not grading each other. This is just shooting your shot. Screaming your barbarian yawp out into the void. Here we go.
I've actually like last week. Sounds good. He's doing skiing or something. Yeah.
it's hard to like make
Interior,
I don't really come up with the sentence, I just came up with the ideas. Like, it's an outdoor activity, it's something that's been going on, really. It involves, but it's a good exercise. I just put down my thoughts that were not very informative. Or how it relates.
it shows backpacking. First sentence. That's first
I
time.
also,
But super rewarding.
I'm a big history buff. I'm a focus on history.
Yeah, I like that. So actually, we did look into Do you have any like spots to go in?
basically the idea that like,
I would say
you go on a trip really fast, and it creates that mind about your
Yeah. Yeah, I was just glad, you know, like, yeah, I did at about 9:30 this morning, and because the late start, we just do that platform, which, if anything, just made it more crazy. Yeah, we all showed up. That's what happened to my roommate. They canceled mine. I was so bummed. She's like, and then like someone canceled their okay, then my other professor, professor canceled class. She's like, I don't have anything to do. I was like, wow, that's I try not to do that because I definitely, like, I'm in my last year, so like, been there, done that, learned my lesson. Yeah. It's a struggle at the end. And like, I really like that's all the 8 a.m. Yeah, so easy to sit. Especially for class stuff, lectures.
Yeah, it's like for real there because like something that's like oh wait, that's not
That makes
yeah, we're looking
sense.
for wow, yeah, we could definitely. We've been to team soccer.
I
That's
There's certain classes that they can't do.
yeah, I mean you can see there's a trail. Also, oh wow, there's
right outside.
Well, that's not. Let's talk about interpretation. Being able to like engage with typically.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Like,
So this is
yeah. Oh, yeah. Is it like pretty similar to like this one? To like this one, like that area.
Not as small, I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's,
Yeah,
you know, it's real, but it's just, you know, technology.
like, it's really good to describe, you can see it. Like, I didn't learn the parks.
Yeah, I was kind of same thought process.
National Park Service.
Yeah, do my content. Okay, wrap it all up. Trying to think of one, but it's, I don't know, my brain is able to go backwards.
Smoking.
Yeah.
There's different kinds.
It seemed like that for like all of it. Yeah, all this kind of like weirdly like rainforest almost. Like he says, God, that's a you guys have time?
I look back at it, but like, lens of
Yeah, actually, over where we went to Snowbird. I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
Giant sloths.
Yeah, Snowbird.
Now we don't have
So it's just outside of Salt Lake City.
I got into a whole deep dive of it at some point. Now I'm really into it. Yeah, I don't know why.
this is your jam.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Come on, guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
I did backpacking. Like my starter, like the thesis is like the best worst time of my life. So just like kind of get into something.
And I picked skiing, specifically downhill skiing. And then for what I came up with, great outdoor activities, leisure.
Like maybe up to me. Pretty good racket, man.
I got some of the books as the original land grants. It was just crazy, all that land, you know, it's all land grants, you know, $100. Like in the forest. Dude, watch out, march out. We didn't pay taxes in the forest service, was buying 640 acre sections for $6 a piece. Yeah. You know how much land they have over that land.
Yeah. But it's also kind of patchworky too. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's tough. It's very tough. All right. Let's see. All right. We have about 2 minutes left, so we'll bring it back together. And first off, I'm honestly excited about hearing all these different topics. We have giant sloths the rollerblade. We got giant sloths rollerblade, maybe. So this is gonna be an interesting semester. Thank you for not having boring topics. Because enthusiastic. All right. Our next move from here is to take another swing at, especially if you haven't had a chance to figure out those first two theme statements to kind of kick things off, or theme interrogatives to kick things off. The next other piece for our next class on Monday is to deep dive into something that's interesting to you. So if you haven't yet had a chance to go really hard on giant sloths, and that's your topic chosen, then spend a couple of days, a couple hours in the afternoon, maybe on a cold gray day, cracking open a book or a PDF on giant sloths, or whatever your topics are. So this holds apart approach of theme driving your choices on content kind of assumes that you already know at least something about something you're interested in or passionate about or concerned about. But if you feel like, gosh, there's just a whole lot more I should know about this before I start making editorial decisions on include this, don't include that. What if I have a blind spot? I don't even know about this other part of it. this is your chance to start jumping in on that. So whether your chosen species is beavers or sloths or whatever, start teaching yourself a little bit about it. And take a look at how the information you are consuming is written. Most of it is not going to be interpreted in literature. If you head over to Wikipedia, that's like 0% interpretive content. It's just the facts as reinterpreted by Russian disinformation, right? So, we'll come back on Monday and we'll resume it right here. Pick it up on your topics and with your theme statements, underpinned even further by new knowledge. See you then. Be safe driving home. Have a good weekend.
Have you ever seen that NBC video about the Brandon Mill over there?
Not a video about it, no.
They made a video a while ago, but it's